The Firestorm at Holzwihr. Opening scene, January 26, 1945. Holzwihr, France. Archival snow drifts across the frame. The burned-out husks of American and German armor litter a desolate French village. A lone German soldier from the 2nd Mountain Division peers through the shattered window of an aid station, watching medics carry in the wounded. His unit had just launched an assault with 250 men and 6 tanks, against a single American lieutenant standing on a burning tank destroyer. That lieutenant's name was Audie Murphy. And his weapon, a simple .50 caliber Browning M2 heavy machine gun. Within 1 hour, the German force had been shattered, reduced to barely 70 survivors. Those who lived could speak of nothing else, the relentless hammering roar that had stopped them cold. It was not a wonder weapon. Not a marvel of engineering. It was a machine gun first produced in 1933, a weapon so brutally efficient, so mercilessly reliable, that German soldiers across Europe came to fear its sound more than any other. From that frozen field in Alsace, the M2's reputation was sealed in blood. Murphy, wounded and alone, had climbed atop a flaming M10 tank destroyer and turned its turret-mounted .50 caliber gun on an entire German infantry company. For over an hour, he held the line, firing until his ammunition was gone and the German attack dissolved into chaos. When the smoke cleared, the Medal of Honor citation would record 50 enemy casualties inflicted by that single weapon in Murphy's hands. German medics quickly learned to recognize the signature of .50 caliber wounds. They were unlike anything caused by rifles or submachine guns. A hit to the limb meant amputation. A hit to the torso meant death. The sheer kinetic energy of a .50 caliber projectile turned flesh and bone into ruin. In frontline hospitals, doctors could do little but watch men die, or attempt to keep them alive long enough for evacuation. For many, there was no escape. But it wasn't just the physical destruction that made the .50 caliber so feared. It was the psychological aftermath. German soldiers who had faced sustained .50 caliber fire often suffered combat exhaustion, breakdowns, and paralysis of will. They realized that the weapon's range, power, and relentless volume of fire made survival a matter of luck, not skill. The M2 Browning didn't just kill soldiers. It killed morale.
The Sky War. The day the Luftwaffe learned fear. Visual, black and white archival footage. Contrails over Europe. Heavy bombers forming up. By 1943, the war over Europe had become a battle of endurance. The Luftwaffe ruled the sky with Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, swift, deadly, and confident. But as the Americans entered the air war, the skies began to change. Thousands of B, 17 flying fortresses and B. 24 liberators rose from English airfields each dawn, slow, heavy, and vulnerable. At least, that's what the Germans believed. Then they met the M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Each bomber carried up to 13 of them, mounted in turrets that covered every approach. From nose to tail, from waist to dorsal gunner, the airframe bristled with the cold steel of Browning guns, a fortress not just in name but in fact. When the Luftwaffe attacked, they didn't meet a defenseless formation. They flew into a storm of .50 caliber fire. The M2's reach was astonishing, over 1,800 meters of effective range. Tracer lines filled the sky like molten threads, weaving death through the clouds. German pilots spoke of flying into a curtain of fire so dense it seemed alive. One Luftwaffe ace, interviewed after the war, described it simply. It was like diving into the mouth of hell. A burst from a single Browning could shred aluminum, tear through engines, and rip pilots from their seats. Even glancing hits from .50 caliber rounds left aircraft limping home. bleeding fuel and oil across the frozen sky. The Americans had achieved something remarkable. They had weaponized volume and precision. 10 men in a B-17, each behind a Browning, could deliver a storm that not even Germany's best could endure. In the spring of 1943, during the raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, entire Luftwaffe squadrons were torn apart. Their attacks dissolved into flaming wrecks and black smoke. By 1944, the Luftwaffe began to avoid the massive bomber streams altogether. It wasn't the bomb load that terrified them. It was a defensive ring of .50 calibers. And when the long-range P-47s and P-51s joined the fight, each wing carrying up to 8 Browning machine guns, the nightmare only deepened. In the air, the M2 reigned supreme. It made German aircraft too fragile, too costly to replace, and too few to matter. The .50 caliber didn't just guard the skies. It took them.
Steel and flesh, the M2 on the ground war. Visual, Normandy hedgerows. A Sherman tank rolls past infantry. The thunder of distant artillery. By 1944, the M2 Browning had become more than a machine gun. It was a symbol, the steel voice of American firepower. Wherever the U.S. Army advanced, the M2 followed, mounted on jeeps, tanks, half-tracks, and even on tripods dug into muddy foxholes. Its deep, rhythmic roar could be heard across every battlefield, a sound the Germans learned to recognize and dread. To the infantryman, the .50 caliber was salvation. To the German soldier, it was terror. Unlike rifle-caliber machine guns, the Browning fired bullets the size of a man's thumb, half an inch in diameter, each weighing more than 4 times that of a standard 7.92 mm Mauser round. Traveling at nearly 900 meters per second, the projectile could pierce brick walls, engine blocks, and the armored skin of light vehicles. German infantrymen learned quickly, there was no cover against a .50 cal logs, sandbags, even stone walls, none could stop it. They called it der Scharfrichter, the executioner. A single burst could turn an MG-42 nest into silence. It could cut down entire squads trying to cross open ground. Even tanks were not immune. Archival cut, M4 Sherman, M3 half-track, DUKW. Mounted on the M4 Sherman's cupola, the Browning gave American tank crews a weapon the Germans envied. When used in urban combat, it turned upper stories and sniper positions into death traps. German tankers often reported their viewports shattering under .50 caliber fire, not penetrated, but spiderwebbed and blinded. An immobilized tiger or panther became an easy target for airstrikes or bazookas. In North Africa, the M2 chewed through half-tracks and trucks with ease. In Italy, it cut down German paratroopers caught on rocky slopes. And in Normandy, it became a tool of annihilation. American half-tracks rolled into battle with twin .50s blazing, sweeping hedgerows and tree leans. Each shot sent shockwaves through the countryside. One German veteran from the 352nd Infantry Division later recalled, "We feared no man with a rifle. But when we heard the heavy gun, that deep hammering, we froze. There was nothing you could do. You prayed it wasn't aiming at you." The M2 was merciless. But it was also precise. Gunners were trained to use short, controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, conserving ammo, each shot measured, deliberate. The effect was devastating. The German infantry's pride, their MG-42, could match the Browning's rate of fire, but not its reach, not its weight of impact, and not its durability. The M2 rarely jammed, even in mud, snow, or desert heat. It was not a perfect weapon, heavy, cumbersome, and slow to redeploy, but when it was in position, the battlefield belonged to it. Wherever the M2 pointed, the enemy ceased to exist.
The weapon that defied time. Engineering the .50 cal. Visual, early 1930s workshop footage. Black oil, brass casings, mechanical precision. Long before it earned its legend on the battlefields of Europe, the M2 began as a vision. One man's pursuit of perfection. That man was John Moses Browning, perhaps the greatest firearms designer in history. By the end of the First World War, Browning had already transformed the way men fought. But as tanks and aircraft reshaped warfare, he saw a new problem. Existing machine guns no longer had the reach nor the power to meet this new age of steel. He conceived of a weapon that could destroy an aircraft, tear through armor, and remain simple enough to mass produce. In 1918, his prototype fired for the first time a monstrous gun chamber for the .50 BMG cartridge. A bullet almost 6 inches long, weighing nearly 2 ounces, with the energy of a small artillery shell. Visual: engineers feeding belted ammunition, slow motion recoil. The gun itself was brutal in appearance. A solid steel receiver, nearly 4 feet long, capable of sustaining fire for hours without failure. Its mechanism was elegant: short recoil, lock breech, cyclic precision. The Army called it the Browning M2 heavy barrel, and production began in 1933. By the time World War II erupted, the M2 had already been refined, tested, and adopted across every branch of service. It became the standard offensive arm for bombers, the primary anti-aircraft weapon for tanks, and the backbone of American ground firepower. But its greatest triumph was its durability. In mud, sand, or snow, the M2 simply did not stop. It was heavy, yes, but it could fire thousands of rounds without a single malfunction. German soldiers respected that. Their MG-42s were lighter and faster, but they burned barrels and jammed under sustained fire. The M2 never flinched. The Germans attempted to replicate its role. They produced the MG-131, a 13mm machine gun for aircraft, and the MG-151/20, a 20mm autocannon, both technically superior in some respects. But none could match the Browning's combination of power, simplicity, and adaptability. It was not merely a weapon. It was a machine designed to outlive the war itself. When John Browning died in 1926, he never saw his creation in battle, but his design would go on to outlast every empire of the 20th century. The same gun he built with hand tools and intuition would remain in American service for over a century, from Normandy to Korea, from Vietnam to Afghanistan. The M2 Browning changed only in the smallest details, because perfection needs no revision. Even the Germans, decades after the war, admitted a quiet truth. They had never faced another weapon so enduring, so punishing, and so perfectly engineered. The M2 was not built to impress. It was built to endure.
The battlefield psychology: why Germans truly feared it. Visual: archival footage, medics carrying wounded soldiers, slow-motion tracer fire cutting through night. Fear on the battlefield is rarely born from what men see. It comes from what they hear, the patterns, the rhythms, the sounds that mean death is near. For German soldiers in the Second World War, one sound became unmistakable: the deep, mechanical thunder of the .50 caliber Browning. They called it Das Donnergrollen, the rolling thunder. It was not the frantic chatter of an MG-42, not the sharp crack of rifle fire, but a heavy, measured hammering that shook the ground and broke the will. Even before a bullet struck, the sound alone could halt an assault. Veterans described moments of paralysis, entire platoons pinned by the sheer psychological pressure of that booming cadence. The Germans were no strangers to war. They had faced artillery, flamethrowers, and Stuka dive bombers. But the .50 caliber was different. It created an illusion of omnipotence, the sense that nothing could protect you. A wall wouldn't stop it. A trench wouldn't stop it. Even armor could not guarantee safety. Reports from the Eastern Front show similar phenomena. When Soviet DSHK heavy machine guns opened fire, German soldiers reacted with the same panic. But the M2 was more accurate, more sustained, more deliberate. Its fire didn't rage uncontrollably, it hunted. The difference was intent. American gunners were trained to engage methodically. Their heavy machine guns used not as tools of suppression, but as instruments of eradication. Captured letters and diaries from Wehrmacht soldiers often reference encounters with the .50 cal. "When the heavy gun begins, it feels like the world ends," wrote one private from the 116th Panzer Division after Normandy. Another recalled, Our men refused to move in daylight if the Americans had one of those guns on the ridge. You could not see the shooter. You only heard the heavy heartbeat, and then someone fell. Psychologists later studying combat stress noted that German soldiers exposed to prolonged .50 caliber fire showed signs of auditory trauma and anticipatory panic, symptoms now recognized as acute battlefield PTSD. The Browning wasn't just a machine. It became a psychological weapon. For bomber crews, its reputation was the same. Luftwaffe pilots spoke of the Fliegende Igel, the flying hedgehog, those American bombers bristling with Browning guns. They learned that attacking from the rear, where the tail gunner waited, was almost suicidal. The .50 caliber turned confidence into terror, aggression into hesitation, and the German advantage in training into a disadvantage in morale. It broke the human spirit before it broke the body. Visual: gunner silhouette against blazing tracer fire, orchestra of distant engines fading. In that sense, the Germans did not simply hate the M2. They feared it because it redefined inevitability. It made courage obsolete. Every man under its fire knew the same truth: you could not fight what you could not escape.
The turning tide. The .50 cal and the fall of the Reich. Visual: archival footage. Convoys rolling through ruined towns. Bombers passing overhead. German prisoners marching under gray skies. By 1944, the German war machine was collapsing under the weight of its own ambition. Fuel was scarce. Morale was broken. And across every front, the Americans brought with them the same unmistakable sound, the deep mechanical rhythm of the Browning .50 caliber. From the beaches of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes, the M2 carved a brutal path through German defenses. Cut: Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. As the landing craft dropped their ramps, many American soldiers found cover behind their mounted Brownings. Machine gun nests on the bluffs above were torn open by .50 caliber fire from Dukus and LCVPs offshore. Concrete pillboxes cracked under repeated impacts. The German defenders, accustomed to small arms fire, suddenly realized the scale of the weapon facing them. Even those not directly hit felt its presence. Bullets ricocheted through sand and steel, striking with such force that the air itself seemed to vibrate. Cut: Ardennes Forest, December 1944. In the Battle of the Bulge, as German armor thrust through fog and snow, American half-tracks and Shermans used their M2S to devastating effect. Tiger and Panther crews found themselves under siege not just from anti-tank guns, but from an invisible web of tracer fire that tore through infantry support. When the Germans tried to counterattack, the Brownings met them before they could close the distance. The weapon's range meant the Americans could strike, while remaining untouchable. Each time the M2 opened fire, the balance of power tilted further. It wasn't simply killing soldiers. It was denying the Germans the ability to fight at all. Supply trucks, motorcycles, staff cars, all fell victim to the same merciless barrage. Entire columns could be halted by a single M2 crew hidden in the tree line. Cut: aerial footage of burning convoys, smoke trails and valleys. German commanders quickly learned to fear ambushes that started with single heavy burst. If you heard the .50, you were already too close. Even elite units, Fallschirmjäger, Waffen-SS, Panzergrenadiers, reported crippling fear of the Browning's presence. Many refused to advance across open terrain if intelligence suggested an M2 was in place ahead. By 1945, the weapon had become an instrument of dominance. It secured the skies, shattered the armored spearheads, and anchored every inch of Allied advance through Europe. When the Reich finally fell, the M2 Browning stood at the heart of victory, not as a miracle weapon, but as a perfect marriage of design, endurance, and terror. It was a weapon that never broke, never hesitated, and never forgave. Visual: slow pan over an abandoned German helmet. The shadow of a Sherman tank passing by. In the ruins of Berlin, Silence finally replaced the hammering roar. But for those who had faced it, the echo of the .50 caliber never truly faded.
Legacy of power, the M2 after the war. Visual, archival footage, GIs loading ships, new wars beginning. Title fades, The Next War, 1950. When the guns of Europe fell silent in 1945, the world changed. Empires collapsed. Borders shifted. But one weapon, one sound, endured. The Browning M2.50 caliber never left the battlefield. It simply moved on to the next one. Cut, Korea, 1951. Snow, hills, and frozen rivers. In the mountains of Korea, the M2 once again found its voice. Chinese human wave attacks surged through the night, their bugles echoing through the valleys, until met by the same hammering defiance that had broken the Wehrmacht. American gunners mounted their Brownings on tripods, jeeps, and tanks, cutting through darkness with lines of fire bright as lightning. Reports described hillsides alive with red tracers, each burst tearing through hundreds of charging men. The weapon proved as lethal in Asia as it had in Europe, unyielding, unstoppable, eternal. It became the weapon every soldier trusted, and every enemy learned to respect. Cut, Vietnam, 1968. Helicopters rise from jungle clearings. In Vietnam, the M2 returned, this time, in the air. Mounted on Hueys and riverine patrol boats, it thundered across rice paddies and jungles, its echoes rolling like distant thunder over green canopies. It defended bases, ambushed convoys, and sealed perimeters in the black of night. Even as technology advanced, as automatic grenade launchers, missiles, and miniguns appeared, the M2 remained. It did not need to evolve. It had already achieved what few weapons ever could, timelessness. Every generation of American soldier trained on it. Every war planner included it. And every adversary, from Korea to Iraq to Afghanistan, learned that even in the 21st century, a weapon designed in the 1920s could still dominate the battlefield. Cut, modern footage, night vision. Convoy in Afghanistan, turret-mounted M2 scanning a ridge. In modern warfare, the M2 stands sentinel atop armored Humvees, MRAPs, and tanks. Its steel body, slightly refined, still fires the same massive cartridge, still roaring with the same brutal authority. When insurgents ambush a convoy, it is the M2 that answers. When drones scan for fire support, it is the M2 that guards the perimeter. A century after its birth, it remains the final argument of American firepower. From the skies of Germany to the deserts of Kandahar, the sound of the .50 caliber has marked every generation of war. It is not a relic. It is a constant. A perfect design. A machine that transcended time itself. Visual, fade to black. A single burst of tracer fire in slow motion arcs across the night. The weapon that the Germans feared most, became the weapon the world would never forget.
Conclusion. The weapon that outlived its enemies. Visual. Slow aerial pan across battlefields past and present. Verdun, Normandy, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. Fading sunlight. The sound of distant thunder. Wars end. Empires fall. Ideologies rise and decay. But some machines, forged in the crucible of necessity, outlive the men who built them and the enemies they destroyed. The Browning M2.50 caliber is one of those machines. Cut, black and white footage of John Browning at his workbench, then dissolved to modern factory lines. It began as one man's experiment in precision and power. A century later, it stands as the longest-serving machine gun in human history. It was not beautiful. It was not revolutionary in appearance. It was simply right. The balance between simplicity and destruction, between reliability and terror, between man and the machine he commands. Its effect was both physical and psychological, the deep, measured rhythm of its fire signaling not just force, but inevitability. To its enemies, it was the sound of hopelessness. To its operators, it was the sound of survival. Cut. Montage. B. 17 gunners scanning the sky. Tank crews in snow. Modern soldiers behind turrets. Generations of men have fought behind its steel frame. Young, frightened, determined. their lives bound by a trigger designed before their grandfathers were born. And yet, even today, the M2 Browning remains in service across the world. Modernized, recalibrated, refitted, but still the same at its heart. Its cartridge, its rhythm, its voice unchanged. It has defended convoys in Iraq, mountain outposts in Afghanistan, and NATO borders in Eastern Europe. It will likely fire again in wars yet unimagined. Visual. Slow zoom into the barrel of an M2 silhouetted against the sunset. The Germans who faced it in 1944 could not have known that the weapon they feared most would still stand guard long after their Reich had turned to dust. The M2 Browning was not just a machine gun. It was, and remains, a symbol of endurance, a reminder that in war, as in history, some creations achieve a kind of immortality. Music swells, low strings, distant echo of a single shot. It is the weapon that outlived its enemies, the echo of a century, the unending hammer of American war. Fade to black. Text appears: the Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun, 1933, to present.